All right. So thank you and good morning. You are joining today for the first of a four-part dialogue session on wildfire risk reduction, specifically tribal workforce capacity. Today's session is focused on funding opportunities for developing workforces to address tribal priorities. I'm going to go through the agenda really quickly, just so you have a sense of how we're all going to be speaking today. We will, let me do that right now. We will be starting with the housekeeping. One thing I would encourage all of you to do is to share your name, contact information, or not contact information, but name, affiliation, and what brought you here today. And we'll start off with introductions from our co-hosts from Forest Service and Intertribal Timber Council. We also have some panelists sharing just general thoughts and considerations to get the dialogue going, Alyssa Tanner and Melissa Alicio. And then we'll have an opportunity for our participants to ask questions of the speakers, and then we'll move into dialogue. So we really do encourage you all to share comments, questions, thoughts, your own experiences, to really get into the concept of funding opportunities, barriers, considerations to build workforce capacity that is focused on tribal priorities. That's today's session, and then we'll close out with any closing remarks from our co-hosts, and then get us prepped for session two, so to speak. So that's the structure for today's session. As I mentioned, please feel free to enter any questions or comments in the chat box. If you would like to open your mic and share, please use the raise hand function and we'll call on you. We will ask that you hold any questions or comments until after our panelists are done with their overview. You're welcome to put them in chat, we just won't bring them to our panelists discussion until after their overviews. So if you do want to put it in chat so you don't forget, feel free to do that. Just be forewarned, we're going to wait till after the panelists are done. With that, we are going to be posting some materials in the chat box. So those are items that you can reference online, and those will come up shortly. And just as a reminder, please introduce yourself in the chat, name, affiliation, what brought you here today. And I am going to turn it over to Andrew Johnson. Andrew?
All right, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Andrew Johnson. I'm the Forest Services Deputy Team Leader for the Wildfire Risk Reduction Infrastructure Team. And so first, I just want to thank our Tribal Nation representatives and the Forest Service employees who've taken the time to join us today as we kick off this dialogue series. We recognize that there is a lot going on with the Forest Service and other federal agencies, particularly this week, and you providing a large time commitment to engage in both these discussions and the Inflation Reduction Act consultation work that's kicking off next week. So our hope is that these discussions provide you with an opportunity to gather information and to ask questions ahead of the consultation so that we can work together with our Office of Tribal Relations. You have multiple opportunities to bring forward information that is important for consideration in moving this work forward. We're also encouraged Forest Service employees working across our wildfire crisis strategy landscapes and in key offices like grants and agreements to join us today, to allow them to listen and to hear from you the importance of building in the connective pieces to facilitate work between the Forest Service and tribal nations. So why workforce development and what we've heard so far? Through the series of Intertribal Timber Council and National Forest Foundation roundtables held in the spring of 2022, the Forest Service gathered a wealth of information around agency workforce development needs, how to better work with tribal nations and to accomplish shared goals, difficulties in recruitment and retention in forestry and related natural resources fields. However, much of this information was focused on Forest Service needs to accomplish the work described in the wildfire crisis strategy. While those needs are an important piece of this work, understanding tribal nations' workforce development needs, capacity constraints, goals, opportunities is vital to successfully implement the strategy and to reduce wildfire risk across these landscapes. So with this dialogue series, we hope to explore and discuss these needs and opportunities of tribal nations around working with fire on the landscape, increasing resiliency to catastrophic wildfires, what the capacity needs are, where does capacity exist or existing capacity, and where does this work intersect with Forest Service funding opportunities and availability. and how can the Forest Service better work to reinforce the needs, abilities, and opportunities of tribal nations through our grants and agreements and contracting processes. So discussions across the series of roundtables reiterated the fact that it will take more than a fuels workforce to accomplish wildfire resiliency goals. So from Forest Service employees, tribal members, also partner organizations, we heard for the need for planners, partnership coordinators, archaeologists, biologists, ecologists, grants and agreement staff, community and tribal liaison, and project and program managers, all those critical positions that are required to move this work forward. So participants at the Intertribal Roundtable emphasized the need to include tribal cultural bearers in this work. And we know that to effectively do that, we need to have the right people working through the administrative processes to troubleshoot early, find solutions, work through barriers to expand our work together. So we've heard that agreements can pose a significant barrier to working together because of the difficult processes to put together agreements. Lack of personnel who truly understand how this process works. I know that working with the federal government and our contracting and agreement procedures can be difficult, and they can hinder our ability to transfer funds and implement work when mutual benefits are identified and the workforce is available. So what's our plan and what have we heard? So you may have heard that recently the Forest Service announced additional investments in 11 more landscapes across the Western United States that encompass high-risk fire sheds, those places on the landscape where we feel there is the highest risk of wildfire to communities, to infrastructure, to tribal nations, and critical watersheds, critical water supplies. That brings the total number of landscapes where we are making investments from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act to 21. So earlier this month, personnel from those 21 landscapes gathered for a workshop to share ideas, to hear from agency leadership, to move forward on plans to accomplish work. As part of that work, we asked each landscape to compile a list of positions that we need to fill to implement this work. What are their staffing needs all across the board? They're articulating needs for what you would expect, fuels positions, foresters, et cetera, but also the need for public affairs specialists, communications specialists, partnership coordinators, tribal liaisons, social scientists, archaeologists, biologists, all sorts of needs. Specific portions of the workshop focus not only on building capacity within the agency, but how we can work better with others and specifically with tribes to accomplish work. And that is why today's conversation is so important. As an agency, we need to look at the comprehensive nature of what it means to get this work done. We need to treat acres in the high-risk fire sheds in the right places at the right times. We need to create enabling conditions for success for wildfire risk reduction work across broader landscapes and effectively work with other land stewards on their needs. So we are working as an agency to strategically hire the positions we've identified in the 21 landscapes, provide opportunities for federal employment, as these positions are outreached and help fill these key administrative and partnership focused positions that can help us work through the agreements and contracting processes and get more work done more effectively and more efficiently. So we're building out acquisition strategies for these landscapes, essentially a roadmap for contracts and agreements with tribes, with states, with non-government organizations. We're also engaging our national recruitment team to help expand our recruitment efforts and hopefully engage with tribal nations to provide pathways towards federal employment. In the resources for this dialogue series, we've included links to information about the wildfire crisis strategy and associated landscapes. So you have easy access to information on where these landscapes are located, where the work is, what work they have planned, and what it will take to implement this work. The funding structure for the work in these areas is primarily through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and Inflation Reduction Act. Well, we don't specifically know the right mix of funds that will go to each landscape. Each one of those laws has a variety of provisions and rules associated with what the money can be used for. We're kind of building that roadmap now. And so it's important that we engage in dialogue.
Got a little bit of a freeze on Andrew there. So we will see if we can get Andrew back. Not sure what happened there. I'm going to guess with engage in dialogue early on what those needs are for funding based on what we've heard from Andrew. Andrea, if you can, Andrea and Lauren, if you can work with Andrew to get back online. I'm actually going to take the opportunity to switch over to our second co-host. We'll bring Andrew back to just share some opening remarks. Cody?
Thanks, Stephanie. I'm glad that wasn't me. I've had my Zoom crash 3 times on me in the last couple of weeks, so I was scared when he froze. So just like to welcome everybody today. I appreciate your engagement in this. This is something that's extremely important to tribes across the country. So again, excited to see where we can go with this, excited to see what kind of questions come out of the discussion and help us frame how we shape this effort moving forward. So when we look at workforce in Indian country, there's a number of things to consider. I think first and foremost is that tribes are vastly underfunded when compared to other federal agencies. We will have our 4th Indian Forest Management Assessment Team report out later this summer, which will give us details about what those funding discrepancies and really staffing discrepancies look like. So it's important for Forest Service staff to understand that tribes are very challenged, not just because of funding, but we also are located in very rural communities. It's very difficult to recruit. So we have a lot of vacancies within our own staff, and we really have limited funding to accomplish our on-reservation or trust land management goals. So when we look at adding capacity, particularly over an extended period of time, to work with other co-managers, other land management agencies that are adjacent to us, it really takes a concerted effort, a long-term funding source to build that staffing through time. And again, I think there's great opportunities to work with each other. And we've got good examples at Cawville where tribal capacity in some places is better than what the Forest Service capacity is, and vice versa for other aspects of natural resource management. So together we can build very strong teams with very comprehensive expertise in the right areas to make sure we put great projects out the door. It's also important to note that most tribal forestry and fuels programs or fire and forestry programs are almost exclusively funded by BIA funding, which has very specific strings attached to it. So when we look at BIA allocations, those are specifically targeted for the management of trust acres. So we don't really have the discretion to use those outside the reservation. So if we're going to do work on adjacent Forest Service land, that either has to come with additional appropriations from USDA or tribal funding. But tribes, again, many of which don't have excess resources to fund work, particularly for off-reservation work on another federal agency. That's something that's hard to justify to our tribal councils if we want additional tribal allocations. So moving on to the ITC priorities, when we look at this from a national scale, our goal is ITC to help represent Indian country in general. Tribes across this country have traditional territories expanding across a number of different federal jurisdictions, and they have ceded rights in many of those areas. So it's important to note that, and that tribes have perspectives and management goals that they'd like to see achieved too. And I think this gives us an opportunity to engage in that, because historically there's largely been a funding discrepancy, or a lack of funding is maybe a better way to say it, that's limited our ability to accomplish some of these things. One, from a participation standpoint, and two, from just having the funding to carry out the work that's needed on the landscape. And again, to go back to the workforce component of that, if we start to build these projects in, we've got to, through a very deliberate process, grow that workforce, both on the Forest Service and tribal side, to make sure we've got those dynamic, strong teams to manage these projects into the future. And I want to make a note here that I've heard people say this is a once in a career type funding opportunity. And while I agree with that, I think it's also an opportunity to demonstrate what we can do when we have adequate funding levels. So if we show great accomplishments, we start to move the needle on ecosystem restoration. I think at least my long-term hope and ITC's long-term hope is that we just see an increase in base appropriations to continue this momentum that we will hopefully build over the next 5 to 10 years. And again, I think it's important to note that the tribes have goals and objectives they want to accomplish across the landscape, not just on their own acres, and make sure that those, whether it's cultural plants and medicines that are out there available on federal land, those traditional hunting and fishing spots that they used to occupy, the tribe's culture and identity is so tied to place. It's very important that they have some role in the decision-making, priority setting, and allocation of resources and project priorities. So really to engage in that at a very meaningful level, tribes have to have funding and staffing to make sure that they can do that. And ultimately, we have to sell any of these recommendations to our tribal leadership, which is another thing that's difficult because they're unfamiliar with working, particularly with the Forest Service. We have a pretty good understanding of how things function in the Department of Interior, so we can work cross boundaries with them a little easier. But once we move on to USDA, those things are less familiar. Any of you that work with federal contracts know they're very complicated. And whenever you go to a new mechanism, it's a whole new learning curve. So those are challenges that tribes have. And some of the other opportunity or barriers maybe is that we need to really think about how tribal priorities are considered. When people ask, what does tribal consultation meaning, or what does meaningful tribal consultation mean, you will get a different answer from almost every tribe you ask. So it's really dependent on who you ask, and it's very important that you ask those individually. There's 574 federally recognized tribes, and each of them have their own unique tribal governments, their own unique cultures, and their own perspectives on what should happen on the landscape. So while ITC tries to be very mindful of that, we try to represent Indian country to the best of our ability. We're also very careful not to overstep and say that we know the perspectives of all tribes, or that we represent any individual tribal government. So I want to stress that it's very important to reach out to your local tribes to make sure that what their priorities are very clear to you and your agency. And then ensure that we've got support both at the staff level, the forest level, and at the regional level. And we recognize that in the Forest Service, there's a fair bit of turnover, so it's hard to build those relationships. But I think it's very critical to get this work accomplished, because where we see very progressive programs that are accomplishing a lot of work nationally, it's where those personal relationships exist, usually where you've had long-term staff. So the forest soup knows the forest manager very well, usually texting each other like on a weekly basis, just as an example. But where those relationships exist, they tend to reach out more frequently and identify opportunities to work together. So along with the professional relationships, those personal relationships are very important. And again, just to restate, I think it's important to look at how we create or how we utilize current mechanisms to allocate funding over long periods of time. To build this workforce, I mean, we're struggling to maintain what we've got now, and we recognize the need is considerably greater than the capacity we have now. So how do we do that in a very systematic way? And we know that we're all competing for essentially the same pool of talent. So how do we make sure we put the right pieces in the right places so that this gets accomplished across all acres, whether that be tribal jurisdictions, state jurisdictions, federal jurisdictions? And with that, I will stop and wait for questions, or hopefully Andrew's had a chance to log back in and finish any comments he had. So thank you, Stephanie.
No problem. Thank you, Cody. Andrew, I know you were close to finishing up your comments. Did you want to add anything before we move on to Alyssa and Melissa? All right. I'm going to take that as a a warrant to move forward. So also on our list of panelists and folks just sharing some thoughts and opportunities on funding is Alyssa Tanner. And Alyssa, I believe you have a PowerPoint that, yes, we will share those slides with all of those participating. So you will get an opportunity to get those slides. They're beautiful. And Alyssa, if you want to share those and just kind of share some of the specific opportunities, that would be great.
Right. Thank you very much, Stephanie. Good morning, good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for this opportunity to speak with you. So I'm Alyssa Tanner, and I work here in the Washington office for the U.S. Forest Service in the State, Private, and Tribal Forestry branch or department, Deputy Chief Area in Fire and Aviation Management. My job title is Branch Chief for Hazardous Fuels. So I manage the National Hazardous Fuels Program here in the Forest Service. And so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of the work we've been doing and some of the opportunities you might see from the bill and IRA funding, and then can also answer any other questions you might have about just fuels in general, things like that. Other programs we have. So I'll start yammering and move forward with these slides. So the bipartisan infrastructure law was the first one that came out, and there's a couple of sections that really do link up with the tribes. And you can go to the law and find these sections, and so when you get the slides, you can go in if you really so wish to dive into it. But in 40803 is the wildfire risk reduction section, and that can be used on all lands, including Indian country lands. So any of your pueblos and reservations or anything like that, that can also go there. There's no limitations to that. The only thing, I guess the one caveat to it's not really a limitation, is that it must benefit also National Forest System lands. So, and pretty much everything you guys do right next to us is definitely within that ballpark. I mean, we're really working off the same watersheds and wildlife, and also that's pretty easy lift for us. The second one is 40804, which this is more of a forest management area, and it's made where funds are made available to states and tribes for implementing restoration work on federal lands using Good Neighbor Authority or the TFPA agreements. And like I said, this is more of forest management. They're handling that particular piece, and there's a quite a bit of money in that annually that we're taking annually to work on for both Good Neighbor agreements that you send in, projects using Good Neighbor authorities and TFPA authorities. So we just got done with the latest round of that for this year. And so for those of you that put some of those forward, yeah, you're probably going to see some money coming out. So just hang tight. The last one is really the big pot, and that is Division J. That's where really the biggest chunk of our hazardous fuels money is. And there's really no limitations on it. And it does have a caveat in there, or a provision in there, that allows us to take some of the funding out of this provision and put it strictly for TFPA agreements. They did cap this at 8 million per year for TFPA agreements, but because we can also put money towards Good Neighbor Authority, there's just a couple of different mechanisms, a way for us to kind of work to get money and partner up with you on some of the projects that you have interest in doing. So the next one that came out was the Inflation Reduction Act, and this one is a bit more restrictive. It really is to work in the wildland urban interface on National Forest System lands. So it's got quite a bit of money, but because of that restriction, and then for you folks that have been in this business a while, you might remember the Healthy Forest Restoration Act, or what we refer to as HEFRA, and they have used that definition of wildland urban interface. So best thing to help out with that is for folks in Indian country to have community wildfire protection plans, or those what we call the CWPPs. That sets precedence over the other rule for WUI, which is 1.5 miles, which is really, given the fires we're seeing today, is really rather restrictive. So having CWPPs for your pueblos and your communities in tribal lands is perfect, and will certainly help us out on that one. So and certainly ask any questions after this, and we'll get it right to you. Next big thing coming out of bill funding, or the bipartisan infrastructure law, is the community wildfire defense grants, and you folks are definitely available for that. We put a request for proposals out last year, and we're just getting ready to try and release those. We've gone through all the process and going to start releasing some of those as soon as, well, we go through all the stuff we have to go through. But there will be another opportunity. So again, I put the website in there for you folks to look into. So please take a look at that. That certainly will help out quite a bit. Just some heads up on some of the stuff we have done. So we sent some funding out to the Umatilla and Warm Springs folks to do some heritage surveys out there for prescribed fire. So we have started to recognize that it's just not about the actual treatment, that there's a lot of stuff that have to go into it before we can go, take a torch out there. So we need to get some of that heritage work done. And the Umatilla and Warm Springs folks were gracious enough to give us a hand. Thank you all. We sent some funding down to the Santa Clara Pueblo. They've had 3 different wildfires go through there, and the boundary fence between us and the Santa Claras was completely destroyed. And that's, as you folks know, that's always really hard to get put up. So by getting that up, that helps fence off the cattle and things like that. And they can start getting, rehabbing their land, and we can start rehabbing ours. So good work there. And then some fuels treatments that we've also funded over the years with some other folks. So thank you all for all your great work. It's been just awesome. The next one we have, and we haven't yet sent out any requests for proposals. We're finishing off our TFPA request for proposals, and then we're going to send this one out. And this is really the one that's going to work on increasing capacity for both folks in Indian country and for us. What I have done in the past is I've stood up some fuels modules. So the Chugach Moot we've stood up a fuels module with them. We basically have paid for their salaries, their gear, vehicles, just to get them rolling. And they do about 100 days of fuels work with us, and then they're available for wildfires. The same thing with the Choctaws down there in Region 8. They're kind of doing the same thing. Like I said, we're paying for their equipment, their rigs, training, and their salaries. They'll do some fuels work, and then they're available for wildfires. We've done in the Southwest, we've done supporting the Ancestral Lands Co-op and the Wood for Life. Really enjoy doing that. That's some good stuff. So we're looking for more opportunities in that. The thing about the flammable veg, it's to develop crews, train youth, give opportunities to learn so that those outdoor skills, hopefully get them interested in natural resources, and then carry on kind of in that line of work. We also are working with the Intertribal Council to, Intertribal Timber Council, my apologies, Cody. We're going to fund one of their workforce development projects up there in the Salish Kootenai College. Yep. And so we're just in the process of finishing this, just so you know, Cody, we're just in the process of finishing that up. And so that's all looking good. And then the last thing that we have done is we have put some funding into the U.S. Biochar Initiative. This is a nonprofit, and for free of charge, if you folks are interested in biochar, cogen plants, just some mechanism, it's kind of a product producing mechanism, just let us know. They can come out and talk to you about some grant opportunities, what it would look like, what you would need for your land. Kind of one of the things that kind of spurs my imagination, it happened a couple of years ago up there in Alaska for the Hoona tribe. They put in a grant, and they got a $2 million grant to build greenhouses with a cogen plant, which would produce biochar. So the cogen plant would power the greenhouse. The biochar would come out, which helps with soil development and water retention. And a little bit of fertilizer action going on. And so they can grow fruits and vegetables and other plants all year long. So just some thoughts, energy producing things like that, but it's a way for us to use kind of that small wood. But the US Biochar will come out and talk to you if you have any interest in something like that. Some other ideas, if you're kind of wondering, I know of some folks in Indian country. They've got road crews, they've got heritage crews. We're always looking for wildlife surveys. Heritage crews and wildlife surveyors are tough to come by. There's only a select number of companies out there that do that kind of work. And with as much as we're doing, we're beating them into the ground. There's there's just not enough of them to get them all done. Thinning crews, things like that. We're always looking for prescribed fires. We're at some point we're going to have to be burning about 4 million acres a year. We don't have the capacity to do that, and that's just on National Forest System lands. If we're doing the cross boundary work with you folks, I mean that adds up really quickly, and so we're going to need to start tag teaming and pairing up to try and get some of this work done. Other things to think about. So the fuels modules are really good opportunities. We have funding in the bill for tree nurseries on Indian reservations or pueblos, and we'll pay for that. And there's just, you start thinking about that, there's all sorts of opportunities there. We have tree climbers and have the ability to train. So for cone collection, things like that, we could train folks to do tree climbing. We have millions of acres we need tree planting on. So tree planting crews, prepping for all the timber sales that we have to do, prep crews. Also looking for wood banks, wood processing facilities. So then there's some other unique hiring authorities that we have here in the Forest Service. If you've got folks that would be interested, I don't want to steal from anybody. We're always looking for great people to come work for us. And that's a resource assistant program that you do 960 hours with us as an intern. You get to have associate's degree or higher, and then you can have a direct hire. All of this has to be done in 2 years, but there are opportunities for folks that are looking to bring in new folks to one day I'd like to retire, so I'd like somebody to come in and fill in behind me. So we're always looking for folks to bring in, train up, and carry on the next generation. So and then so I know I went through that really fast, and I'm sure your brain are spinning as fast as mine do when I start thinking about all the great opportunities that we could have working together. But I 100% agree with what Cody said, that this is not just a once in a lifetime opportunity. This is an opportunity for us to show that together, that you folks are integral in what we need to do for the land, not just your tribal lands, but your traditional tribal lands, all the land that we have here in this country. That's, it's all about land, people, animals, and that we together need to work to get it all done, and that you're integral and much needed. And so we need to maintain your workforces to help with what we're doing. So thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Alyssa. And your slides are the hit of the show today. So just as a reminder, we will be sending links for all of these slides out. So folks will have an opportunity to get these slides. And we have one more just quick expert person to share. As Cody mentioned, a lot of the work and funding for tribal workforce comes from contracts through Forest Service to do the work, contracts, grants, and agreements. And so Melissa is here to just answer some questions and find answers if she doesn't have them for those questions regarding grants and agreements. So I'll turn it over to you, Melissa. Oh, you're muted.
Yep, someone had to do that. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Melissa Alicio, and I am the branch chief for a newly formed branch in the Office of Grants and Agreements called the Access Branch. And I'll give a little bit of our background and a little bit of the work that we've started to do to give you an idea of who we are. And also, I did want to mention that we have two representatives on the phone just listening in to hear the conversation from our policy branch, Gavin Smith and Jimmy McKenzie. And as was mentioned, if I can't answer questions, I'm here to take those back to the Brain Trust and help help get answers for you. But in January 20, 2021, of course, President Biden issued Executive Order 13985, mandating all federal agencies ensure their missions advance racial equity and support for underserved communities. And during that time, the Forest Service had embarked on an agency-wide initiative to draft and implement the Forest Service Equity Action Plan. So the Business Operations Deputy area, which is where the Office of Grants and Agreements is housed, had the foresight to commit resources to establish a branch dedicated to equity and access in the Grants and Agreements program. And so this effort became part of the Equity Action Plan, which is an action item number 6. And so our mission is to improve equity and access in the Grants and Agreements program in delivering the Forest Service mission. So our objectives are to engage and diversify our pool of partners and who can help us carry out our work, and ensure initiative that ensure equity in the Grants and Agreements process and remove barriers to funding opportunities, and also provide direct support to new and infrequent partners. So our goals then are to increase our Office of Grants and Agreements presence in communities not typically reached, to implement a cross-deputy area model for partnership engagement, which I can talk about very briefly, and then create targeted and inclusive OGA Office of Grants and Agreements type resources portfolio available to all of our new and infrequent partners. And I heard the CWDG, the Community Wildfire Defense Grant program mentioned. And this was our first opportunity to try to implement what could be, what we see anyway, as an innovative model for how we can work together. Typically, the Office of Grants and Agreements comes after the fact, down the road when we process grants and agreements. But we thought that if we could be involved at the outreach phase, that would really help eliminate some barriers and some confusion in what it's like to work with the Forest Service. And as with the Community Wildfire Defense Grant, we were able to collaborate with state and private forestry at the outreach phase. We participated in all of those webinars, and I know we had specific webinars targeted for tribal organizations specifically, and we're able to provide one-on-one resources for help. You could book an appointment with us. We also developed a pre-award guide that became part of that overall package that was advertised on grants.gov. And we fielded questions to our inbox for any potential applicant who had issues, concerns, or questions or needed clarification throughout that application process. And so we want to take this model and expand it across national forest systems and within state and private forestry, and provide that assistance in particular to our new and infrequent partners, because it's not that easy to work with the federal government, and we know that there are barriers. It's like a whole different world. And some of the positive feedback we heard was, one response I can think of sent to our inbox after we responded to a series of questions was, I can't believe I actually got a response from the federal government. So I feel like that's big progress, and that's what we're here for. So I will drop in the chat our link where you can book an appointment if you need it, and also our inbox. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them for you.
Great, thank you, Melissa. So that is the group of folks we have online, just to start the dialogue. Let's see if we have hands raised or questions in the chat for any of our speakers. So just make sure if there's any questions, we've got those answered. So you can either raise your hand at the bottom of your screen on the reactions, you just click on that and there's the raise hand function, or you can share your question in the chat box. All right, and not to forestall, you can also, if you don't have questions, and just so you all know, Andrew is back. If you want to ask him any questions, we were able to get Andrew back, and I think Andrew, you were pretty close to your final remarks as well.
I was, yeah. Sorry about that, everybody.
All right, so if we don't have questions, not to say you can't have questions. Oh, we got one from Vernon. Vernon, did you want me to just read it or do you want to share it? I'll just read off the question from Vernon Stearns in the chat box. Through these opportunities, how are funds moved to tribes? Are there opportunities for upfront advanced funding to tribes to carry out any agreed upon deliverables, or are tribes expected to do the front cost and get reimbursed? Melissa, do you want to take that one?
Getting caught up here. I'm on one screen today, so I was moving things around so I could see the chat. I can't answer specifically, but I can answer broadly, and that it would just depend on what type of work it was and what authority it fell under, how we would be able to go into partnership to accomplish the work. And Alyssa might have more detail too, just based on this very specific types of projects that she outlined. And not to put you on the spot.
Well, I think I might be able to help you answer it. I think the bigger problem is not necessarily doing the work, but for like some of the crews we're standing up, they would not have the capability to pay for chainsaws, the personal protective gear, hard hats and chaps and fire gear and all that stuff up front, and the trucks. That the funding that the Forest Service can bring through the agreements, either the 638 TFPA 638 agreement or a Good Neighbor Authority, that they would need in order to get started. And so some of the crews that I've stood up, I've actually paid for for their supplies, trucks and things like that. So if it's sitting there in a Good Neighbor Authority agreement, is there a mechanism in that they can access those funds to pay for the equipment that they need to buy and not have to put the funding up front? That's what the limitation is. They don't have the bank to pay for all of that gear up front.
And then also just based on putting to pieces of what everyone said, and Melissa, Andrew, or Alyssa, or Cody, correct me if I'm wrong, depending on what authority and what mechanism is used to do the work will also dictate whether reimbursement or advanced funding is available. Usually under federal contracts, it's to do the work in advance and then invoice for the costs. So if it's a contract, it's likely going to be reimbursement. If you do need upfront, you might want to look at those authorities that have grants or agreements and allow for advanced funding or capacity support. Is that a fair summary of what you all shared?
Yes.
Yeah, so I think honestly, if you're wanting to stand up a crew, the grant and agreement mechanism is the best way to go. If you've got your crew already stood up and you're just working with the Forest Service to do contract work through the 638 agreement, that's the best mechanism for just doing work, because it's a single source. It's basically a single source contract. But for standing up any sort of crews, if you don't have the finances to upfront get your crews rolling, specifically, I'm thinking like those fuels modules, because those things are expensive, then that's probably the Good Neighbor Authority is the one you're really going to want.
Great, thank you, Alyssa. And Cody, I don't know if you have any experience to share.
I think you just came back.
I literally just sat down 2 seconds ago. Repeat the question, please.
Folks are just asking about different opportunities for advanced funding to tribes to carry out an agreed work versus when tribes are expected to front the costs and get reimbursement. And so if you just had any suggestions of things that have worked. to add
So-
to the discussion.
Sure, we've had a couple examples. The TFPA 638s are the easiest mechanism because that funding comes up front and then the tribe gets to spend down, is my understanding. We have had challenges. I don't know that we have it yet, even though we signed the contract about a year ago. So even the mechanism of getting the money from USDA to the tribe has been a bit of a challenge. Our accounting staff is still working on that. Otherwise, with Good Neighbor, there should be an allocation that comes up front out of the infrastructure bill funding that tribes could use to plan and implement projects with their Forest Service or BLM partners. And then project revenue, presuming we get this addressed in the next farm bill, which we're very optimistic we will. So hopefully by the time you complete the project or we get it to approval, we will have that farm bill issue addressed. And then that program income would go to the forest and we could use it for subsequent planning. But there was a significant amount of funding that was set aside in the infrastructure bill to fund Good Neighbor and TFPA agreements. Otherwise, we've used different mechanisms like challenge cost share agreements for like cultural resource work. The Forest Service has a lot of different authorities for agreements and contracts. Almost always, if you work with your contracting officer, can you find a mechanism that will fit fairly well?
Yeah, it was, I think, Cody, the thing was that up front, if you're trying to get yourself rolling and you're needing like gear, supplies, vehicle, after the funding heads your way for the work, like when I stood up fuels crews and things like that, is it easier with a Good Neighbor authority from your end or the TFPA end?
So
To get-
we haven't tried Good Neighbor yet because
Okay.
we don't have that fix in the Farm Bill. But with the Tribal Forest Protection Act, in those agreements, you can identify capital equipment that you would purchase to carry out the work.
Okay.
Excellent. Thank you, Vernon. That was a great question. Appreciate you sharing that. And then Lise LaRue had a question. I think, Andrew, you're going to take a stab at this one with respect to limitations on which funding you can apply for as a tribe, and can multiple programs be applied from the same grant sources, and can tribes apply for multiple sources under the BIL. So I know Andrew's going to take a stab at that, and then I'll let some of our other panelists, including Melissa, who seems to have a hand raised, take a stab as well.
Yeah, and I think Melissa can probably provide more concrete details than I can. What I would say is that BIL affords us more flexibilities than the Inflation Reduction Act. Inflation Reduction Act funds are targeted towards use only on National Forest System lands in the wildland urban interface. However, we have more flexibility under the bipartisan infrastructure law funds, the BIL funds. And so that would probably be the primary source of funding we would use to facilitate work with tribes. So I think, there's the good spot. I think part of your question was also around, if your local contact doesn't have the answers you need, what do you do? And so what I would say to that is that, ask that they elevate that to their regional Forest Service contacts, which, works with our team and with others in the Washington office to try to facilitate answers and barrier busting and get folks the help they need. We collectively really want to move these funds out and put them to work. And so when there are questions or roadblocks to that, we want to remove them, answer the questions, remove the roadblocks, and really activate as quickly as we can to get good work done. So maybe Melissa can be more specific than I can to that question.
No, actually, I've just thrown everyone here. I do not know how that hand is raised. I have to. I was typing and must have hit some kind of shortcut that raised the hand. So yes, apologies.
No worries. And then
Thank you.
I think a follow-on. Oh, go ahead, Cody.
Just one thing I would note, I would try to find a mechanism that covers everything you're going to do, because working through multiple contracts and having reporting requirements on multiple contracts just increases your workload. So I would try to avoid that at all costs.
Great advice. Thank you, Cody.
So,
then
and I would say the other thing is, if you're wanting to, and this would be me, if you're wanting to hedge your bets and put in and just kind of scatter your opportunities, hoping that something will come your way, I wouldn't be overly concerned about that, as long as you're working closely with your Forest Service partner. We've been able to find ways, if I get a project coming my way, I find a way to make it happen one way or another. And you might end up hearing back from us saying, could you possibly take it this way? So we're looking for you folks to get a hold of us. We're looking for places to support you and your work with your neighboring forests. And so there's a lot of opportunity out there that we're, and yeah, I'm moving mountains to try and make it happen on the ground for you folks. So just send it our way and we will do our best.
Melissa, go ahead.
Hand is up again. I did nothing except turn my video on, so I don't know what's happening there.
All right, I will ignore your hand, but
Yeah, just ignore it. I saw the question, is there technical assistance available to tribes to writing grant proposals, contracts and other documents? So I can definitely answer to the grants side of the question. That is what our office is here for. And we did provide kind of a pre-application guide we did target it to CWDG, but we also took that and it made a broader document. Right now it's just in PDF. It is 508 compliant. We want it to be a resource that's more dynamic than just that, but that at least exists, and one-on-one assistance exists through our office. And right now, our expertise is in the grants realm, but we're moving over to the partnership world. So, you know, even in that realm, if you have questions, we can definitely be a first place that you come, and we are committed to connecting you with an answer. That's something we did with the CWDG model. We weren't always the subject matter experts, as you're hearing, you know, me on the call today. I can't always answer the questions, but we do know how to go find answers, and we make sure that question is handed off to somebody and that a response happens, so that we're not just, you know, leaving you to have to go chase that down. We do that for you.
Great, thank you, Melissa. And then Sarah Hoagland, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Stephanie. And first of all, thank you for everyone who's presented here today. I think this is a really valuable opportunity, and I'm glad to see these workshops kicking off. This is something that we've needed for quite some time. But so yeah, my name is Sarah Hoagland. I work for the Rocky Mountain Research Station as the Tribal Relations Specialist. I'm also pretty active in ITC and used to be the past research subcommittee chair. And we're currently working on IFMAT, which Cody had mentioned earlier in his opening remarks. And so IFMAT will be coming available realistically this June, and we're presenting to ITC on our findings, which is an assessment of tribal forests in the US and looking at forest management. But my question that I had to hear today, mainly probably to Andrew. Andrew, you had mentioned the Forest Service, you know, doing some hiring opportunities in the landscapes that have been identified. And I think one like perfect place to do some recruitment, especially to fill those positions of tribal liaisons and heritage staff and for all these work crews, is ASIS, the American Indian Science and Engineering Society. And this year it's going to be held in Spokane, Washington, where a lot of tribes are surrounding that area. And it just seems like a perfect, like low-hanging fruit for the Forest Service to be involved in and roll out some of these initiatives. So hosting a session and presenting on these topics. We are in the phase of planning for a Forest Service booth at the career fair that ASIS is holding. And I know, or I hope that it's on the list for the national recruitment team to be in attendance too, but I just wanted to highlight the importance of ASIS because that's the nation's like leading organization for Native Americans in STEM, and like what better population to be filling these roles. So just to elevate that organization and make sure that we're keeping them on our radar in all of these conversations, and you know, even making sure that they're attending these events, things like that. So just wanted to give a shout out for ASIS, and again, thanks. It might not be a question, but Andrew, if you have any comments on ASIS, we're looking for somebody in the Forest Service to fund our booth, and maybe we can even get some Native tribal crews there walking around the career fair. Like, let's really start to build these, I don't know, increase that recruitment and retention at that level. You know, get those little 5-year-olds excited to be working in forestry. Sorry, I'll get off my soapbox.
Thank you, Sarah. And I'm before Andrew comments, I'm going to encourage you to join our March 23rd session or dialogue series, because we are focusing specific on specifically on recruitment and retention, and specifically youth recruitment and retention. So let's let Andrew finish, but if folks want to dig deep into recruitment and retention, join us on March 23rd. Go ahead, Andrew.
Awesome. Thank you. And Sarah, thanks for bringing that up. That is fantastic. Yeah, that is the exact sort of opportunity that we need to avail ourselves of and leverage as best we can to be more successful in hiring. And I think in bringing more Native Americans and tribal members into our workforce. And so I will definitely pass that on and elevate that with the national recruitment team to ensure they engage there. One of the other things I would say is that under the bipartisan infrastructure law, it provided to the Secretary of Agriculture the ability to exercise a host of emergency authorities, and also for the Chief of the Forest Service to exercise a host of emergency authorities. One of those would be to add some direct hire authorities where we could do additional non-competitive hiring to fill some of these critical needs across landscapes. And we're working closely with the agency's human resources shop, as well as the Office of Personnel Management to kind of figure out how to use those new direct hire authorities. And I think hopefully that ability will come online soon, so we can leverage those and maybe add an event like you described, be able to fill a lot of these positions that we know we need across the 21 landscapes in the West.
Great. Thank you, Andrew. And let's see, do we have any other questions or comments? And Melissa has been posting a ton of items in the chat box, and we will follow up and share those with everyone, as well as lists. So some of those include, if you haven't seen them, is an email to the Access email address for that, and a link to actually book a one-on-one discussion or consultation for that grants and agreements writing support that Stephanie asked about and Melissa was discussing. And I think we've got most of the questions we saw on the chat. If I missed one, if folks can just flag that for me.
Did we get Stephanie's? Because I think that's a good question about capacity.
That was what Melissa was covering about
Okay.
the Access office providing capacity for grants programs. Stephanie, do you feel like you got enough information for that, or did you want to follow up with anything?
Hi, thanks. I think just sharing out as much as you can that there is this resource available would help increase the access and outreach to tribes who are applying for these funds. It's something that I see often in my work with tribal partners is the capacity to write and upkeep with the reports, like Cody was mentioning, is really difficult.
It's a great suggestion. Go ahead, Cody.
I would add that if folks want tribal examples, I think there's a number of us that have entered into projects or agreements like this that are willing to share those and share advice with tribal staff if that's helpful. So ITC would be another good contact.
Great, thanks, Cody. And Sarah, if you could put a link to the ACES career fair in the chat box, there looks to be interest for that. So
Will
thank
do.
you.
Yep.
I'd like to add to, just to respond to Stephanie, that we were just newly formed 1 year ago. And so even just spreading, I'm happy if all of you share the word that we exist. We're a small team, but we're mighty is what I like to say. And this is what we're here for. So appreciate that comment.
And I will point out, we are saving the chat and we'll be looking at any policy questions or considerations that we need to explore, as well as follow up. And I think thinking through how to share the Access resources with tribal audiences is going to be part of that kind of evaluation. So thank you for that. And I just wanted to put a finer point on something Lise LaRue asked, and I think you all covered it, but I just want to make sure is the question regarding, if your local contact, so we've shared that when you're doing this work, you're getting set to do the work, the fire reduction work, fire prevention work, you need to work with your local contacts with Forest Service as a tribal representative, and engaging with the contracts agreements or contracting folks early on is going to be important to make sure that your authorities match with the funding that you'll need. But sometimes that local person may not have all the answers. And so I think the question is, if the local person doesn't have the answers, where can we go? And I think the answer is there, you know, you can go regionally. There's the access folks. There's also the folks that you've seen on the phone. There's the ITC folks with examples. And I think coming to the panelists and others is a great way of saying, hey, I've got the situation. Can you apply, since every situation is different? I just want to make sure we close the loop on that question. Melissa?
Did my hand go up again?
You went
No.
off mute, so I was
No,
just,
that was intentional. That was intentional. No, I was just seeing Sarah's comment about providing technical assistance. Is that, you know, writing a trust responsibility. I'm not sure what you meant by that, if you wanted to clarify just for a minute, but the comment I was going to make was, we do provide anybody who would come to us and ask for that assistance, we would provide that. And it isn't necessarily to write, but it is to answer questions, help guide, you know, help clarify, and it would be the same kind of assistance we would apply, you know, especially in a competitive grant type process, that we would share that with anyone who came to us. But you might have meant trust in a different context.
I think it was the government to government trust responsibility.
Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, I think it's a gray area, but it's something for us to think about. You know, if this is really helping tribes achieve their vision for sustaining their forest resources into the future, one could possibly argue that whether it's the BIA with Dark Service or the Forest Service or whoever else is assisting in these areas as a federal agency and federal employees, maintaining those trust relationships and that responsibility, I think is pretty key. But, you know, a lot of it, there is some gray area, and there's, I'm just curious if, and sorry, I didn't mean to throw out that philosophical question to folks, but we can probably switch gears, but hopefully that further explains.
Thanks, Sarah. We had a couple hands up, and then I do want to make sure we get to some of the other topics as well, but Cody, go ahead.
So just one thing I want to point out, particularly to the Forest Service staff, that when you look at tribal staff, we get pulled in a lot of different directions. So you guys get to stay in silos more so than we do. So just looking at Cawville, we brought on 6 different grant writing contractors just to be able to take advantage of all the funding available in the infrastructure bill. So it wasn't just forestry, it wasn't just fire management. It covers an expansive infrastructure capacity, most of which tribes don't usually have access to. So there's going to be a ton of competition for the staff that tribes do have to try to gather as much of this funding as they can to meet all of those functional tribal needs, whether that be public water systems, whether that be power line infrastructure. So there's just a ton of different things that will compete for time with these. So it's important to reach out to them if you see opportunities, because my assumption is, unless they have a very, very specific thing that they want to try to accomplish, this is probably something that's on their back burner to some extent.
It's a great recommendation, the Forest Service staff online. John, go ahead.
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes, I had a question for Alyssa. Again, you mentioned biochar. That was a interesting kind of information like I'm interested in. So as Cody had mentioned, the pueblos or tribes just get pulled all directions again, but particularly for our pueblo, again, there's that support for our local sawmill operation again. Well, these funding, again, I know they're on the ground, but you mentioned biochar and capacity building. Will any of these BIL or IRA be appropriated, or is it, we'll be able to fund, I guess, through an enterprise for supporting the sawmill operation?
Yes, we also do wood innovation grants, and we're looking to expand capacity. So that will probably come out again later this fall. We'll do another round, and we have quite a bit of money that we put out to support wood innovation grants. And so we're always looking to increase the amount of processing opportunities. And biochar is a big one. In fact, we are funding, there's actually a biochar plant that is associated with a sawmill. It was built kind of on the same site out there in John Day, Oregon on the Malheur. It's not tribal, but just for your information, and we're helping to support that and pay for the work going into it. So yeah, we're interested in doing that and finding more opportunities to increase where we can put wood. Definitely. And the biochar, you're right, it's a tough market right now because not a lot of people still know it, you know, but if you guys are up there in the, John, I don't know where you are, but I know I worked on the Umatilla, and that's where we kind of started that whole thing. And the yield coming off of winter wheat fields was 23%. And by the time I left, they were working on their 4th year and they didn't have to rust their fields. So the amount of productivity that you see is really beneficial. And then to put it into a greenhouse with something like that, you know, big time. I think there's some really great opportunities and definitely can power a sawmill. And since you've got the chips and the bark and things like that coming off a sawmill, it's pretty common that I've seen cogen plants coming off of that. And then all you have to do is just stop the paralysis a little early. Instead of going all the way to ash, you just stop it a little early to produce a biochar. But if you guys are interested, we can certainly get in the US biochar folks out there to kind of look and see what you got and what it would take.
Yes, very interested. Sorry, yes, I'm from central New Mexico in Pueblo Jemez, north of Albuquerque.
Oh, yeah. I've been trying to get you guys to put that in because yeah, you've got a lot of wood down there that could work perfectly for that.
All right. Thank you. Yes, do reach out to me.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah, no, I was on the Apache Sick Raves on the Alpine Ranger District. So yeah, I know that area very well.
Great.
That'd be a great place for y'all.
Excellent. Well, we'll make sure John and Alyssa get connected for the biochar. And then I think we have time for a couple more questions I see from Heather. One regarding opportunities to fund firefighter training for fire crews that are being stood up. And then another question about examples from either other tribes or what other tribes are doing for winter plans to keep their crews busy once those crews are up and running. So let's first touch base on the funding to stand up a fire crew. Alyssa, I know you mentioned you listed some opportunities for fire modules. Do you have anything to add about funding for that?
Yeah, so we've been using granted it's a little broad brush, but I figure anybody younger than I am is a youth. So we've been standing up, we've been taking that removing a flammable veg and using it to stand up fire crews. And basically they're fuels modules, fire crews, but you do fuels work and you work on your quals and things like that. We're paying for the training, gear, trucks, things like that. But there's a agreement for, like, I think the Chugach Mutual stood up for 5 years with the agreement that they would come every year and do 100 days of work for us and on land, thinning, whatever, burning. So yeah, that is a definite possibility. When we send out the proposals, certainly let us know. And again, just talk with your local fire folks about it, and they can contact us and we can tell them all about it. We've been working with the regional fuels specialists that have kind of been heading a lot of this stuff up. The other one, winter work. Yeah, so depending on where you're at, I know that I would do that and I'd go out and mark trees and lay out timber sails and things like that. So if your folks, that could be part 2 of the as well, not part 2, but part of that, in the wintertime, you can switch over and lay out thinning units and things like that to reduce hazardous fuels. So especially if you're in those landscapes, I mean, they're going to have a lot of work, but pretty much across the board, we have shortfalls in laying out and marking trees. So then it's a kind of a skill set too of, learning how to lay something out, how to mark trees and run the GPS to do all the stuff we need to put out the thinning contracts or whatever, or just think. Let's see. What's the other
And
one?
Alyssa and Andrew and others, it hasn't been overtly said, but I think the suggestion is that there is workforce development funding, but it usually needs to be tied to land treated, right? Like find a project that you can train on the ground, or is that incorrect?
The stuff that I have, yes. We haven't, I think the workforce development piece of the infrastructure bill, I haven't yet tracked that down, but I don't think that we've actually gotten much into that. I think that's being handled, it's being handled by a different branch of FAM, and so I haven't really tracked that down. I haven't seen anything come out for that.
Yeah,
But
okay.
I mean, there's more than enough work across. I wouldn't worry about it. There's tons of work everywhere.
Well, yeah, and I think you outlined a couple of great examples of, treating and training at the same time. I just wanted to, in terms of what we've heard, it sounds like finding areas that can be treated and as also an opportunity to build workforce is good. And then I see John's hand went up, but I also do want to alert you, Heather and others, Cody has an example of in the chat box of using a combination of fuels, preparedness, suppression, and forest health funding to keep crews employed for at least 9 to 10 months. So please take a look at that for that reference. And then John, go ahead.
Yes, again, this is relating to the BIL, the funding and the new IRA that I just heard today. But we, the Pueblos have, or tribes have RTRL, Reserve Treaty Rights Line again. And those are funded through BIA. It's a good program to work on ancestral lands again, NFS lands. But hearing this from our partners again, U.S. Forest Service, is it the best mechanism to apply for these BII funding, I guess, through securing some kind of mechanism, or I don't want to get in trouble, or I think BIA RTRL is tapping into the same BIL funding. Is that double dipping or anything like that? Is it considered?
No,
No, okay.
nope, it's not double dipping. And your RTRL stuff is kind of similar, but again, the funding mechanism is coming through the BIA, and it's working on specific historical tribal lands that are now in national forests. And so you can do the same thing with that. You just have to, have that agreement with the forest to do that. Yeah, you can do the same thing. That I think it's yeah, I think it's a little easier with the TFPA and things like that for like equipment and things like that. But
Right. And then I've got Alicia and then Cody. Go ahead, Alicia. Alicia, if you're connected with your phone, remember to *6 to unmute. *6 again, Alicia. All right, we can't hear you yet. I'm gonna come back to you, Alicia. If you want to plop a comment in the chat, we can do that too. Go ahead, Cody.
So the RTRL funding is a set aside that comes out of DOI's funding right off the top, out of their fuels budget. So that's something you absolutely can use. And it's a competitive thing though, so it's a less reliable source if you're looking for something to feed, say, a portable sawmill or a biochar facility. John, I would recommend you take a look at the Indian Energy Act that was passed about 5 or 6 years ago. It has a biomass demonstration project authority within it, which is about to expire, but we're going to ask for an extension of that. in the next farm bill that would allow a stewardship contracting authority up to 20 years. So you could look at adjacent federal land that could potentially serve as a feedstock for either of those and propose a project that would allow you to access those for an extended period of time. And there's some language in there that we haven't tested yet because nobody's done one of these demonstration projects, but it says to the extent practicable under approved tribal forest management plan objectives or something to that extent. So I would explore, or I would recommend you take a look at that language. And if you've got questions about it, again, reach out to ITC. We can give you some background on the legislation, kind of what we try to do to implement it. But unless you've got a facility that you can send that stuff to, it's not particularly helpful the way we had it drafted. We might have to make some amendments to that.
Look for, if you have a website, again, Indian Energy Act, right? Cody?
Indian Energy Act. I'll put my contact information email in the chat so folks can email me if they have follow-up questions.
Thank you.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Cody. And I want to check, John, Gavin Smith, did you have any thoughts? I believe you are posing as Melissa on Zoom, but I just wanted to see if you wanted to add anything. Gavin? All right. Well, we are getting close to the end of today's dialogue series. I just wanted to see if there are any last comments or questions to share in thinking through funding opportunities. And we have a couple people joining as well. All right, if there's no questions or comments, just want to check with any of our hosts for today's session. Any closing thoughts based on today's dialogue? Cody?
Sure, just thank everybody again for their participation. This is as much alignment as I've seen between all agencies, all land managers. So I think this funding has given us a great opportunity to engage where we maybe haven't done as good a job as we could have in the past. But just encourage folks, if you've got questions, if you think there's opportunities, but you're not sure how to get there, to reach out to both sides. Either tribes that you know that are successful, Forest Service partners, or ITC. And I think we can probably give you some good recommendations on how to get to the end game you're searching for.
Great, thank you, Cody. And Andrew, I don't know if you're having any luck. Wanted to check and see if you had any closing remarks. Andrea, go ahead.
Yeah, hey, Stephanie, he's had lots of Zoom problems today. So everyone, I'm Andrea. I'm with the Wildfire Risk Reduction Infrastructure team as well. And just like Cody said, just super appreciative of the conversation. My thanks to Forest Service colleagues. The first time I've seen in a really long time, not only this alignment with really critical partners and community members like tribes and tribal organizations, but the houses in the Forest Service coming in alignment too, and where we have opportunities, but also assistance lined up. And so please really do reach out, even at the levels here in Washington, DC, when you run into barriers. Our jobs exist right now to help this, to dismantle some of those barriers for you. So just we're here to help. Thanks.
Thanks, Andrea. And I will point out that the Access folks will be taking a look at some of the questions in chat and offering any additional information that seems relevant. I did want to emphasize we had a lot of really great comments that we will be taking into our discussions for later sessions. And I'm going to pull those up just so folks have them. And so some of those later sessions will be looking at recruitment and retention. And thank you, Sarah, for the reference about ACES. We'll also be looking at workforce assessments and regional considerations, and some of the work Intertribal Timber Council has been doing, Forest Service, BIA, in terms of assessing what the workforce needs are, beyond just what we heard from Andrew's comments and others. It's beyond just fire crews, well, although that's an important component, but we're really looking at all of those considerations. So March 9th, we will be looking at, how do we assess workforce needs? what type of regional considerations we need to take into consideration. So if you have questions that you'd like discussed during that session, please feel free to send those to myself or Lauren Cordova, and we'll put that into the agenda. And Lauren's going to put our email addresses in the chat. On session 3 on March 23rd, we will be talking about recruitment and retention, and we'd love to do a deeper dive into issues like recruiting Indigenous youth either to tribal jobs or Forest Service or BIA, or just basically working on the land and the different opportunities there. So we will dig deeper there. And then during session 4, we really will be taking a look at all of what we've heard in all 4 sessions or 3 sessions to date, in terms of what may still need to be done or considered from a policy and implementation to identify those barriers, remove those barriers, and increase those opportunities to ensure that workforce capacity and workforce development needs are really hitting both Forest Service needs, but particularly tribal priorities, as we discussed today. If you have any additional questions or comments that come up after you've reviewed the materials, or if you are reviewing this video because you weren't able to join us today, please feel free to send those to the National Center at lucero@udall.gov. That's on the chat. We will forward those to our panelists. Many of our panelists also shared their information in the chat box, so you are encouraged to reach out to them as well. And just a really big thank you to everyone for joining us today. Look forward to having you join us for the remaining sessions in our dialogue series. We know there's a lot going on, and we really appreciate you taking the time today. We hope today was helpful to you, and if there's anything we can do to make this information even more accessible or useful, please do not hesitate to reach out or ask. So with that, I will give you all about 9 minutes back to your day and really appreciate all of you, and have a wonderful day. Thank you.